Happy Halloween. Leave now while you still can.
Leave now before Master finds you.
Who is that knocking at my door? Who is that knocking at my door? Who is that knocking at my door? Be gone with you.
Hello everyone, in today's video I'll be talking about The Revenge of Frankenstein from 1958. Before I start this review, I forgot to mention in the last video about 4 years ago in 2019, I did reviews of the Hammer Frankenstein movies on my friend Christian's YouTube channel, link in the description. After the success of the first Hammer Frankenstein movie, Hammer thought, let's make sequels and let's franchise it. This movie came out 1 year later after the Curse of Frankenstein's success. This movie also came out the same year as Hammer's horror of Dracula, but by a few months apart. It was once again directed by Terence Fisher. Unlike Universal, where the Frankenstein monster was the main character focus and is supernatural, instead, Dr. Frankenstein is the focus throughout the entire series. Sometimes he's portrayed as an anti-hero or an evil mad scientist, like in the first movie. Christopher Lee does not play the monster again, unlike Boris Karloff, playing the Frankenstein monster 3 times. This one may not top the first movie, but it's still an okay, decent, solid sequel follow-up. Despite the title of this movie, they don't imply what is Dr. Frankenstein's revenge. It's not like he's out to set revenge against someone he knew in the last movie. Maybe he's out on revenge against the medical field community to pick up where he left off and creating a new creation. I could be wrong on this one, and maybe I'm thinking too deep into that. In the later Hammer Frankenstein sequels, they were mostly rebooting, not follow-up sequels, but this is one of the few follow-up Hammer Frankenstein sequels that had a follow-up. It picks up right where the last movie left off, seeing Dr. Frankenstein being executed. But somehow, for an unknown reason, he survived. I have mixed feeling about this. Anytime I've gone back to rewatch this, sometimes I keep asking myself the same question over and over again. How did Dr. Frankenstein get out of that execution? I guess I'll never know the answer to that question, or maybe I'm missing something. After supposedly Dr. Frankenstein getting out of the execution, it cuts to a bar, the two drunk men at a bar gossiping, and go to a grave to see if Dr. Frankenstein really is dead. This reminds me of the opening scene of Frankenstein Meets the Wolfman, when 2 grave robbers rob Lawrence Talbot's grave. After digging the grave, Dr. Frankenstein shows up, scares the grave robbers, one has a heart attack and dies, and the other one escapes, and we never see him again. A few years later, Dr. Frankenstein is living a regular life, hiding his real identity. His fake name is called Dr. Stein, short for Frankenstein. It surprised me that the medical board directors were not smart enough to make the connection until Hans sees the connection that he is Dr. Frankenstein. He works as a medical doctor at a hospital. It's weird, despite in the last movie, Frankenstein was an evil mad scientist bastard. In this movie, he's a little bit two-dimensional. He shows a little compassion to his patients at his job that he works at, but he's still a bastard in this movie. Especially how he's still trying to create a monster. But he's still a bit less evil than the last movie. A little more anti-hero. But once again, Peter Cushing does a great job in this movie. He's Dr. Frankenstein. He knocks it out of the park. Hans is obsessed with Dr. Frankenstein's work, despite his past, and he wants to follow in his footsteps. Frankenstein takes him under his wing and mentors him. Hans looks up to Dr. Frankenstein as a friend, and he's very loyal to Dr. Frankenstein. He's like a little kid who gets thrilled and excited meeting his idol and working with him. It doesn't take long for Dr. Frankenstein to mentor Hans, otherwise he will blackmail him and expose his identity. Hans wanted to have Karl as a lifelong experiment, saw making a lot of money being rich. But Karl did not want fame or be a lifelong study, he just wanted to be cured and live a normal life. Hans is a real asshole in this movie. You can point out that he's the real villain of this movie. The character Karl is likable and sympathetic. All he wanted was a regular, normal body. Karl was tired of being bullied and picked on for his imbalances. You really root for this guy and show empathy for him. You want Karl to be cured, but it's a sad, tragic ending for him. After burning the old body, Karl's beaten up by a janitor who thinks he's a thief. What an asshole. I felt bad for Karl getting beat up by this prick. After getting hit in the head, Karl goes on a rampage killing people, and he becomes cannibalistic. He dies crashing a party, going near saying Frankenstein right in front of everyone, exposing his identity. Frankenstein tries to fool the medical board directors that he's not the real Frankenstein, but the board directors don't believe him. Can't blame him for that. Even though I do like this movie, one minor complaint I have about this film is the character Margaret was kind of boring and not that interesting. Her only presence was being a love interest for Karl. She does try to care for him when he runs away after committing a murder. It's also bizarre that Dr. Frankenstein uses an orangutan's brain and that the experiment on Karl was only a short term. Apparently, Dr. Frankenstein thought a monkey's brain would help him work on Karl. What's next? He puts a dog or cat's abnormal's brain? Or the dish they had for dinner in Clue? Gee, you really suck, Dr. Frankenstein, at helping people with reanimating new bodies. Karl experiences the same side effects as the orangutan, which alters his personality. I don't know why, this idea made me think about Island of Lost Souls. When Dr. Frankenstein swipes brains between Karl and the orangutan, it reminded me of Ghost of Frankenstein with the brain switching. After Dr. Frankenstein's identity has been exposed, his patients in the hospital refuse to let Dr. Frankenstein examine his patients. Then again, can't blame him for that. They're scared and afraid of what he will use their body parts and brain to turn them into zombies. The patients beat the living crap out of him. Dr. Frankenstein is damaged. After being beaten up badly, Hans operates on Frankenstein to give him a new brain and body because he's the only one who knew how to perform the operation. When Dr. Frankenstein once again changes his identity, switches bodies, he looks the same, does not look any different. Jason Bourne had different, better identity names compared to Dr. Frankenstein. Dr. Frankenstein, in a way, you could say, cheats death. I forgot to mention that the eye and body part practical effects are pretty cool and awesome. They look so realistic. Another 50s movie, for example, that had a little gore to it. This may not be a great movie, it is not top Curse of Frankenstein, but I still find myself enjoying it and finding some good quality value to it. It is a flawed movie, but for me it's still good enough and satisfies me. Not a masterpiece, just an okay, decent, solid Hammer Frankenstein movie for me. I can see myself going back to rewatch it on occasional viewings. So that was my review of Revenge of Frankenstein. Like the video, subscribe, and hit that bell button to get the latest updates on my YouTube channel. And stay tuned for tomorrow for The Evil of Frankenstein.